Burlington Wine Club. The time has come. So I'm the club sommelier. I'm Teresa. I think most, if not everybody, knows me. Just a reminder, we are recording this session, but if you don't want to be in the recording, you can turn off your video. And of course, Marilyn edits things very well so that the first half hour of us chatting and everything doesn't show up on the video, and it's only the formal portion. You can ask questions at any time. Use the chat function, and Marilyn's my co-host, and she will periodically look at the questions and we'll take a break and answer the questions. So yeah, so Marilyn's the co-host as usual. There are two different modes as well, if you're not familiar. One's the speaker mode, and that means you only see me and or whoever's speaking and the presentation. And then there's gallery mode, so you see other people as well, and you can scroll through. Okay. Normally we do the thank yous at the end of the presentation, but I would really like to take a couple moments to do some thanks at the beginning of this presentation, because we've been virtual now. So we got kind of shut down in March. We skipped one meeting, and then we've been virtual since then, and we're starting into a new year. And it's been a really different world, and there have been just a lot of people behind the scenes that have been doing like awesome work. And so I just really like to thank people. So the cooks, Dorothy, Lorraine, Carl, Anne, and Kathy, up until this month, from March, April of last year, right through to October, they were working outside with masks at individual tables spread across my backyard, and making salads, cutting things, packaging things, putting all of the bags together. And it was really interesting because October, the end of October, was really, really cold. So everybody was out there in coats, in masks, in hats, one at a time, coming into the house to get warm, just to try and manage. If it's there, yeah. So anyway, and we were kind of glad that Maggie was doing the dinner in November, because we don't think we could have handled the next month in the winter in the cold. So anyway, these guys just went over and above this year. It was awesome. Communications, Angela and Morag, again, a different world, different notices going out, trying to get social media up, trying to get notices about our local wineries and our agents' wines and everything, so that they benefited even though we were in trying times. Wine sales, Angela, again, a different way of doing things. When we were live, we had the forms. She collected the forms at the end of the evening and sent them off. This way, we're doing wine sales before, we're doing e-transfers, we're doing forms afterwards. It was just a whole different world, and took a while to kind of get it all together. Co-host Marilyn, just during this whole video time, has kind of really stepped up to the plate. She's been the co-host on all of the video calls, and all the dry runs. So because I'm the speaker this time, we didn't have a dry run, but whenever we've had other speakers, we have one or two dry runs beforehand. There's a lot of stuff that goes into the background. So anyway, Marilyn, thank you very much. My co-host and chief problem solver. Something goes wrong, we figure it out. Sue's not with us tonight, but we have a new volunteer that she's kindly offered to take on membership. So Laura Lee has done it for the last 5 years, but come April, May, when we went virtual, she and her husband didn't really want to make the transition to virtual, and also she has a lot more job responsibilities, and she's been promoted at work, and so she just doesn't have the bandwidth to do things. I've been handling it, and I would kindly suggest that I haven't done a great job with the membership over the last while. So Sue's going to come on board and take over the membership. So if your membership's due or past due, which in some cases, because of me, it is, Sue will be contacting you sometime over the next little while. So that's great. The next two categories are kind of interesting, and they were really, really important this month. So wine shoppers. So the wines for this month didn't come from an agent. So normally an agent delivers all the wines and delivers them to Marilyn's place. These wines all came from the LCBO and the wine rack. And the LCBO has been low on so many different things, and their inventory is really crazy. It took Mike, Dave, Carl and Ann, Kathy, and then Mike again to make trips to the LCBOs and the wine rack to pick up all the wines that you're enjoying tonight. So that was a bit crazy. Fortunately, next month we have an agent, already know the wines, and they're going to be delivered. And then food shoppers. Some of you may or may not know, I'm kind of housebound, so I rarely leave. So Mike has been doing Costco runs throughout the last 6-7 months. And Dave, anything else that's needed, they've been my food shoppers. So it's really taken an interesting way of going about things for the last while. And these are the folks that I am just totally indebted to for, getting this all together. Anyway, thank you guys very, very much. Okay, recent events. In November, we had the virtual Christmas dinner with Chef Maggie. I think that went pretty well. And then December, for the first time, because we usually take December off completely, we had Toast and Treats with Chef Mike. So we brought in, we're hoping for great things 2021 at some point. So there were some treats in a kit and a toast for not New Year's Eve exactly, but the day before. And then coming up, February 13th, we're going to have a Valentine's chocolate and wine pairing. And at the end of the masterclass, I will talk more about that and what's involved and how you can sign up. The end of February, Darlene is coming from Univin and Spirits. And it's kind of great having agents come back because they kind of know the club, they know the price points, they know the wines that we're interested in, and also they're very excited to bring new products to us. So she looks through her portfolio and says, what's new coming up and what can I bring them? So she's coming at the end of this month, and we've got a nice selection of wines. And so when we were live, of course, we only went the last Thursday of every month. Now we've switched that to the last Friday when we're virtual. And also we're adding a Saturday night mid-month event. So in February, it'll be the Valentine's Day chocolate and wine pairing. And the 13th of March, we'll do something different. I'm still working on the details of some of them, but plan on the second Saturday of the month and the last Friday of the month to be doing something with us. Okay, and again, if you have any suggestions, if Sue gives you a call, let her know, or if you want to email me or whatever, I'm totally open to suggestions as to what we can do, especially over the next few months. Okay, tonight is the Sparkling Wine Masterclass. Okay, that's me, the masterclass. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about tonight is the wines, and I'm going to introduce the wines and foods that are being paired tonight. And so once the introduction is made, you can kind of taste and drink each of the wines at your leisure throughout the process or throughout the presentation. But again, I would suggest that you put them in order of the Veuve Clicot, the Entourage Brut, the Freixenet Cava. I can tell mine was out of order because the color is different. The Freixenet Cava, then the Prosecco, the Sect, so the Prosecco was the Zonin, the Henkel Trocken, and then the Australian. Okay, so that should be your order. And if you don't have all of the sparklings, don't worry about it, of course. Work with whatever it is you have. And then you've got your foods as well, and I'll go through those. Then I'm going to talk about international examples. So what different sparkling wines there are around the world and how they're made. I'm going to talk a little bit about the characteristics of sparkling wine, what you should see in a sparkling wine. I'm going to talk a little bit about terminology as well, because there's some specific sparkling wine terminology. A lot of it comes from the Champagne region, but has been transported over to the other sparkling wines as well. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more, not just about the food pairings for tonight, but food pairings in general that go with sparkling wines. And then I'll talk about vinification. So the traditional and Charmat methods of making sparkling wine, and then a little bit about carbonation as well, the cheap and cheerful sparkling wine. The picture at the bottom, whoops, okay, my mouse is very sensitive. So the picture at the bottom, thank you very much, Beth and Martin. So they sent an email and said, hey, we're ready for tonight. And so you see the computer is there and the keyboard and their plates, but you also see some glasses on the side. So in an ideal world, you have 6 sparkling wine glasses, and that's that not only can be used, but some of them are even quite trendy at the moment. Anyway, let's talk about glasses. And it's my preferred glass for sparkling. And the reason for it is it's long and narrow, and it really captures the bubbles. If you're going to have bubbles in a sparkling wine, they're going to come out the most and stay the longest in this shaped glass. I should have had some examples here, but do you remember the old flat cup sort of traditional, almost looks like a sherbet bowl, but round and low and has a dip at the bottom? That was the original sparkling wine glass. And the interesting thing about that was it was modeled after, does anybody know? Yep. Okay, so we have a couple of people that know. Awesome. So after Marie Antoinette's breast. So if you look at the shape of the traditional sparkling wine glass, that's what it's modeled after. Okay. Now, I still have some of those, and I use them for cocktails, like champagne and sugar, like a champagne cocktail or something. But the bubbles do dissipate very quickly. The wine goes flat much, much faster than in a flute. But they're still around and they're kind of fun. Sometimes on New Year's Eve, I'll use them. The third type, so the current trend in sparkling wine glasses is to use a regular wine glass. And even the big winemakers or wine glass makers are making sparkling wine glasses that are like regular wine glasses. And the people that use those glasses actually swirl the glass and drink from it. So that's fine if you don't want bubbles, because so when you have a flute or anything else, you never swirl your sparkling because the sparkling will kill the bubbles. And so the folks that are proponents of these regular wine glasses say, I don't care so much about the bubbles, but I get a much stronger, better bouquet from the glass than I do from a flute. Okay, so just different schools of thought. So if you don't have enough flutes for tonight, don't worry about it. You'll be totally trendy if you use a regular wine glass.
So Teresa, can you just recap? We're looking at the 3 types of glasses would be a flute. The middle one was called?
So the flute, I'll think of it. I can't remember the name of it, but it's the original, we were all familiar with them, the original champagne glass that was wide at the top and only about an inch, and then had a dip at the bottom.
N is off coupe.
A coupe?
A coupe, yes, thank you. Thanks, Lola.
Oh,
And then the third one is just a regular wine glass, although they have, they are making special champagne wine glasses, but trust me, they look like, they look like Sauvignon Blanc glasses. So this glass here, my everyday glass, the new ones would be very similar to this, but a little bit narrower, but a good open top. Okay, so those are pretty much the three types that are being used. And if you have the can, I wouldn't really drink right from the can.
I just looked it up. It's called a tulip and a wide tulip. For the
Okay.
glasses.
Yep. Okay. So is everybody's got their glasses, everybody's got their sparkling? Okay. So the wines and foods tonight. Okay, so we have a true champagne, a Veuve Clicot. And Veuve Clicot is the widow Clicot. During and after the war, many of the champagne houses were run by women. They were widows. They lost their husbands in the war. And Veuve Clicot was quite young. She'd never been involved in the business at all. And she took it over and did an awesome job. And a lot of the widows at that time in Champagne were running the champagne houses. So anyway, that's Veuve Clicot. Sparkling. And I call it just straight sparkling because in Ontario and in the New World, it's really just sparkling wine. The Entourage Brut, it's made in the same way that champagne is made, and it even uses the same grapes as champagne. And this is the one where I alluded to earlier, where wine writers have called it the poor man's Veuve. And it's why I specifically chose those two to compare. So really important for you guys to taste if you have them. If you don't, some other time when you get a chance. But if you have them, to taste both of them side by side. One is Ontario and one is Champagne. One is the Piccolo, or the 375 ml was $42.95. The regular one's 66 or something. And the Entourage Brut is $29.95. So it's half the price. Anyway, so those made the same way. Then the third one is a Cava, the Freixenet. And most of you are probably familiar with Freixenet. It's been around for a very long time, really reasonably priced. But Cava is made in exactly the same way as Champagne, or the method traditional, like the Entourage Brut. So those first three are made in exactly the same way. So it'd be really interesting to taste the three side by side. I'll talk a little bit about the difference with the Cava because there's different grapes. Okay. Then the fourth one is a Prosecco. So the Zonin Brut. So it's a Prosecco, it's from Italy. And Prosecco is made in a different way than Champagne or the Entourage Brut or the Cava. And so we'll talk a bit about that. And then the Sekt is a German wine. It's the German term for the sparkling, and we have the Henkel Trocken. So the Prosecco and the Sekt are made the same way, but they use different grapes. Okay, so number 6 is interesting. So it's an Australian sparkling. I think it's a Riesling. So it's a different grape altogether. And they talk about it as being a Prosecco style wine, but I think that it's made via carbonation, which is a third way of making wines. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so then the food pairings, and we'll see later on that there are tons and tons of different food pairings that we could use. But the first is potato chips. And so anybody that's been to the Burlington Wine Club for more than 2 minutes knows that we serve potato chips at the beginning of every session, and we serve a sparkling wine at the beginning of every session. The saltiness and the grease of potato chips is perfect with sparkling wine. And I have served regular potato chips with vintage champagne at functions successfully. So in fact, I had one fella say, oh, great. Now when my wife has a bag of potato chips on Friday night, she's going to want a vintage champagne to go with it. And it's true, it really is a good pairing. So then the second one is Indian spice roasted chickpeas. So the reason I chose that, and by the way, it's not a one-on-one pairing, so try each of the pairings with each of the wines. Some will work better than others. They'll all work, but some you'll prefer to others because the traditional method, for example, will be a stronger, breadier type of wine, and the others will be a little bit lighter. And depending on what you're eating, you'll want a lighter sparkling or a more robust sparkling. So anyway, the Indian spice roasted chickpeas. So it's spices, it's crunch, and it's salty. So then the triple cream brie cheese. Sparkling wine loves cream, fat, butter, richness. The triple brie cream cheese, or triple cream brie cheese, if you have a bite of it and then you have a sip of your sparkling, the sparkling will just cleanse your mouth and set you up for the next bite. So if you just eat, so if you have bite after bite of your triple cream brie cheese, your mouth is going to get, like, it's so creamy, it's so dense, your mouth is going to be coated. The champagne or the sparkling wines will cleanse your palate after that creamy cheese. Okay. Then the hot Italian sausage roll. So it's for two reasons. First of all, anything in puff pastry goes with the sparkling wine. So all your puff pastry appetizers, whether you buy them, make them, whatever, anything in puff pastry lends itself to a sparkling wine. And the hot Italian sausage. So sausage is fatty, it's moist, and the hot Italian is spicy as well. So you got some spice, you got some fat, and you've got some butter and richness and pastry. So if you have a bite of that and a sip of your sparkling, again, it's just going to cleanse your palate and set you up for the next bite. Seafood casserole, so that's a shrimp and crab casserole, or chickpea casserole if you're a vegetarian. So seafood, most, if not all seafoods, go with sparkling wines. So whether it's, we'll learn later on, whether it's oysters or lobster or shrimp or crab or whatever, they're natural pairings to sparkling wines. So this seafood casserole has shrimp and crab, and it's also got mayonnaise and some vegetables as well. So it's rich, and then breadcrumbs and butter. So butter, cream, seafood, all of those things go with sparkling wine. I don't like food at all, you can tell, right? So then the last one is simple tea biscuits. And the reason I chose the tea biscuits is because classically in the Champagne region, there is a biscuit de Rien. And so the town of Rien, which is almost the capital of Champagne, they make biscuits. And when you have your tea biscuits, the idea is to dip them in the champagne. So that's how they're used. Like if in Italy you have biscotti dipped in Vinsanto, in Champagne you have biscuits dipped in your champagne or your sparkling wine. Okay. So not a bad way to end a meal, right? Okay, so Marilyn, any questions I need to answer before I go on?
None specifically. Folks were asking what kind of triple cream brie cheese, and just to let everyone know that tonight's came from Costco. It's the Kirkland Triple Cream Brie Cheese, and it's on sale. Don't know whether you want to address at this point why chocolate was not on the.
Nope. That's later on.
So
I'll get there.
perfect. So,
But the triple cream brie, yeah, and I was really impressed. That was one of Mike does all my. He went. It's awesome. I get a text from. I'm at Costco. You need anything for the club or for home or whatever, and that's where the triple cream brie came from. And he said it's on sale, so it was super.
and just one comment from
And
Beth.
I think it's lovely, eh?
Yeah, one comment from Beth and Martin. They tried both the Clicot and the Entourage with ruffles, sour cream, and onion chips. Declared it as quite lovely.
Yes, because the chip boxes come with an assortment of chips, of course. Anyway, okay. So let's talk about sparkling wine and the different types. So of course, the mother of all sparkling wines, the place where it all started, Champagne, France. The reason everything else has a different name is because, of course, you cannot call another sparkling wine Champagne unless it comes from the Champagne region. So Champagne is a region. And, you know, we're very proud of the wines that we make in the Niagara region. And I don't think we would appreciate it if a wine made in Fergus or Collingwood, and I'm saying these because I don't really make, well, Collingwood makes a bit of wine, but bigger, Cornwall. So if people started making wines in Cornwall and they called them Niagara wines, we would not appreciate that because we have a certain reputation in Niagara. There's a particular terroir, and we wouldn't appreciate somebody else using our geographical name. So same, of course, is true in Champagne. And it's actually interesting because there are champagne houses that have other houses in, say, California and Australia. So Moët and Chandon, for example, has a wonderful place in California. And when they first set up, and they make the champagne, or they make the sparkling wines exactly the same way. They use the same grapes. They use the same winemakers. Of course, the terroir is different, and it is not champagne. So they, in the beginning, they labeled their wine Champagne. And then the authorities said, this is California. You can't label your wine Champagne, but it was Moët and Chandon, right? So they said, yes, but we can't command the same price if we don't call it Champagne. And then, of course, they said, yes, that's the whole point. That's why the law is in place, and that's why you have the advantage in Champagne, but you can't take advantage of it over here. You are subject to the same rules. So anyway, it was pretty funny. Hoist by their own petard. So that's Champagne. There are only 3 grapes. Well, there are 3 main grapes. There are a couple of minor grapes as well, but typically all Champagne is made from Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Chardonnay. The first 2 grapes are red grapes, of course, and Chardonnay is a white grape. But only those are allowed. Crémont's interesting, and I recommend Crémont's everywhere I go, because if a wine is made using the Champagne method or the traditional method anywhere else in France except Champagne, it's called a Crémont. And so whereas Champagne might be $66, a Crémont right now runs about $20, $21. It's made exactly the same way. The difference is, or one of the differences is, they use regional grapes. So you have a Crémont d'Alsace, which might be made from Riesling grapes. Crémont de Burgundy is awesome, though. Think in terms of Burgundy. Burgundy just grows Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Those are 2 of the grapes in a real Champagne. So if you have a Crémont de Bordeaux, or sorry, a Crémont de Burgundy, it's going to be made with at least one or two of those grapes. So it's going to be very similar to a champagne. There's also Cremant de Bordeaux. And any place in France, they can make traditional method sparklings. They command a fraction of the price, but they're excellent, in my opinion. So if you ever see the term Cremant, it's just French for traditional method outside of champagne. Cava. So Cava is made in the traditional method as well. And Spain is famous for really modernizing the equipment for making sparkling wines. So there's Giro Palette. Okay, I'll back up a minute. So originally, when champagne was made or any kind of sparkling was made, they have these racks and they have the bottles in the racks, and somebody has to turn those bottles every single day, every bottle every day for months, so that they're rotated until they end up at a, anyway, they're turned around and they're at a certain degree. The Spanish invented a machine where they could put all the bottles in. It's a big, huge machine, and the machine rotates, and it does it in a quarter of the time, and it does it just as well. So even the French in Champagne are using that machine now. And of course, it cut the cost of making sparkling wine way, way down, which is why the Spanish could produce a Cava at a fraction of the price of a Champagne and still be really, really good quality. The difference, though, is they use the grapes that are used in making sherry. So Peralada, Macabeo, Zerolo, those are the grapes that are used in making sherry. And those are the grapes that are used in making the Cava, but it's done in the same process. So your third wine should be a Cava. And so it should be similar to, but it is made with very different grapes. So we don't have a Frangiacorta, but the Frangiacorta from Italy is also made in the traditional method. So Prosecco is from Italy and it's made in a different method. But if you want something that's made in the traditional method, you go for a Frangiacorta in Italy. And the grapes used there are Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, and Pinot Blanc. Not as readily available here. Once in a blue moon, we see them, worth trying. And then we have Prosecco. So Prosecco is made with the Prosecco or Glera grape. It used to be called Prosecco, but the name is actually Glera. And it's done a different way. And I'll talk about the processes later. But the Prosecco is made differently, and it's always the one grape. Moscato d'Asti in Italy, a favorite of mine, a fabulous dessert wine on the sweet side from the Moscato grape. So different. Sekt in Germany, their sparklings are called Sekt, and it's made the same way as Prosecco is made. Okay, so it's not made in the traditional method. It's made the same way as Prosecco. And it's very interesting. Some regions are very, very particular about the grapes that they use. The Germans are not. They will use whatever French or Italian grapes they can get their hands on or on sale or whatever to make their Sekt.
Done right.
Pardon? Sorry. And then sparkling. So the generic term for all of these wines is sparkling, but in the New World, we haven't come up with a name like Champagne or Cremant or Cava. It's just all lumped under sparkling. And what you want to look for on a sparkling bottle from the New World is whether it's the method traditional, which means it's made the same way as a Champagne, Cremant, Cava, and Frangiacorta, or the Charmat method, which is the same way as Prosecco and the Sekt. Okay, and we have both. They're sparkling, and unless you look for the fine print, you don't always know how they're made. You can also tell by the price sometimes. So Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, all make good sparklings, and just about any grape is used. So the Entourage Brut is going to use the same grapes. We use the same grapes as the Veuve Clicot or the Champagne region. And many of the Ontario ones do, but we also have Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling, just about any grape goes. And depending on where you are, whatever the grape is that's common in that area is the grape that's used in a sparkling. Okay, so those are the main styles. Characteristics, bubbles. We want bubbles in our sparkling. So they're also called pearls, perlage. And the tinier the bubble, the better the quality of the sparkling. Okay, so made with in the Chemat method, the bubbles are bigger than made in the traditional method. And the ones that are done just with CO2 infused, which is like soda pop, have big bubbles that burst quickly. So sometimes you can tell the quality of your bubbly just by the number of bubbles. But here's a point again about your glasses. If you pour a bubbly into your glass and you don't get any bubbles, or you get very few bubbles and you know there should be, it could be because there's some residual detergent or soap or something on your glass. Your glasses have to be absolutely spotless and clear and free from any kind of residue in order for you to get bubbles in your glass. If you want bubbles, in fact, quite often just rinse them under hot water and drain them, let them dry without touching them before using the glasses. Okay, so if you want bubbles, your glasses have to be absolutely spotless. Okay, the next is these sparklings can run from very dry to very sweet. And we always think about Brut and we think of that as very dry, but in actual fact, there are drier ones than Brut. So Brut Nature or Brut Zero are the driest sparkling wines that you can find. And what happens is when they make a sparkling wine, at the very end, they add something to it. And they add a dosage, and that dosage typically has some sugar in it. And that impacts the sugar content of the sparkling. Brut Nature and Brut Zero, they do not add any sugar at all. What they top the bottle up with is the exact same sparkling as was in the bottle in the first place. So they have extra, and they top up all their bottles with the original sparkling. And that's your driest wines. And you can find that in the store. You can find that in the LCBO and look for a label that says Brut Nature or Brut Zero, and that's your driest. Then there's an extra Brut, which we don't see very often, but that's next to the Brut Nature. And then Brut. Brut is the most common one. So the Veuve Clicot is Brut, the Entourage Brut. I think the Freixenet is Brut. The Prosecco is Brut. So that's your norm, but it's actually not the driest. There is some sugar in there. There are drier. Yes. And then the names are hilarious because the next one down that is less dry than a Brut is called extra dry or extra sec, and sec is sweet. So extra dry, extra sec, and dry are sweeter than Brut. So just keep that in mind. And then sec is sweet, demi-sec, and doux is very sweet. So now we're talking dessert sparklings over here. But that's your classifications. And then in terms of the aromatics, so bready, doughy, yeasty. So those flavors come typically from the sparkling wines that are made in the traditional method. So the Veuve Clicot, the Entourage Brut, the Cava, the Freixenet. And the reason for that is, so the bready, doughy, yeasty. When you have a second fermentation in the same bottle, you're getting lots and lots of exposure to yeast. And yeast is what is in bread. Yeast gives you a bready smell and flavor. So the longer you're in contact with yeast, the breadier, doughier, yeastier your sparkling is going to taste. Okay, and that is a characteristic, a known characteristic of sparkling wines made in the traditional method. So the other flavors: apples, peaches, lemon chiffon, chalk, rose petals, grapefruit pith, honey. You can have almost any flavor depending on the grape that's used. So you're going to have some apples, peaches, lemon chiffon for sure. If you've got a champagne with Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Chardonnay, because if you took those three wines separately and smelled them, those are some of the flavors that you would get. But if you're going to make a sparkling with Riesling or Sauvignon Blanc or the Cava grapes or the Prosecco or Moscato, you're going to get different flavors. So the flavors can vary drastically depending on what grapes are used. Okay, terminology. And then I'll take a little break after this slide because you probably want just a chance to sip some, ask some questions or whatever. So some terminology. Method traditionnel. So we were talking about this already. That's basically the champagne method. And champagne, Cremant, Cava, Frangiacorta, Cap Classique. So in South Africa, they have actually come up with the term for their sparkling wine made in the traditional method, and that's Cap Classique. So if you see that on a South African bottle, you know it's traditionally made. It won't say method traditionnel. They have come up with that term for it. Okay, and then some sparklings, of course. Then the next is the Charmat method, Prosecco, Sect, Lambrusco. Lambrusco is a sparkling red from Italy. And it's made in the same method as Prosecco is made, the Charmat method. And then, of course, some sparklings. So Jackson Triggs makes the Entourage Brut, but they also make a Couve Close. And the Couve Close is done in the same method as Prosecco. Okay, and one is $29.95 and the other is, I don't know, $14 or $15.95. So it's a different price point as well. And it's a less expensive method of making wines. So then the next term, and you will see this on bottles, these next three terms. So Blanc De Noir. What that means, and especially, again, these terms came from Champagne in the first place, but they're kind of universal terms now. And a Blanc De Noir means they're making a white champagne or a white sparkling from only red grapes, okay? So in Champagne, you have the two red grapes and you have a white grape. If it's a Blanc de Noir, it will be made from one or the other or both of those red grapes, but it will have no white in it. Blanc de Blanc, the opposite, white from white. So again, in Champagne, a Blanc de Blanc will be only Chardonnay, 100% Chardonnay if it says Blanc de Blanc. They won't say Chardonnay on the bottle, but they will say Blanc de Blanc. The Californians make some really good Blanc de Blanc. You'll find quite a bit there because they do a lot of Chardonnay. They don't do so much Pinot Noir or Pinot Meunier, so they do a lot of Blanc de Blanc sparkling wines that are really good. Gloria Ferreira, I think that's how you pronounce it. Anyway, the great Blanc de Blanc there and other ones from California. Rosé, so there's sparkling rosés, and it's interesting because they're made in different ways. You can have a still white and a still red and mix them literally and then turn them into a sparkling, made separately and mixed. And that's probably the most common way that it's made, at least in Champagne. And there are a few other methods as well. So in terms of terminology, cuvée de prestige. So Dom Perignon, Le Grand Dame, and Le Grand Dame comes from Veuve Clicot. So if you want a prestige champagne from Veuve Clicot, you would get the Grand Dame, La Grande Dame. Belle Epoque and Cristal, of course. And so what the Cuvée de Prestige means is it is the most prestigious sparkling or champagne from that house. This is their name brand. This is their top of the line, typically champagne, but it could be a sparkling. And then the vintage or millésime, for the French in the group, please don't correct me. So most champagnes and some sparklings, not as many sparklings as champagnes, are what we call non-vintage champagnes. And so they're a blend of multiple years all together that make up the champagne. And if you have non-vintage champagne, year after year after year, they typically taste the same. So they mix multiple years and they remix and they store them. And the idea is if I pick up a Moet and Chandon non-vintage this year and I pick up one from 3 years ago or I pick up one from 2 years from now, they're going to taste the same. A vintage champagne is made only in really good years. It's not made every year. Typically in champagne, it's made twice a decade. It has to be a certified good year from the board. And then they put the year, and all the grapes must come from that year. Okay, so that's your vintage champagne. And if you get a vintage prestige champagne, so a 2008 Dom Perignon, for example, that's probably the highest end champagne you're going to get. So, and again, non-vintage is a blend from multiple years. Okay. And in terms of a declared vintage, the Champagne Board can declare a vintage for all of Champagne, or individual areas within Champagne can apply and have their wines tasted to be approved to have a vintage put on their bottles. Okay. Any questions about that? Is everybody still awake? Okay.
We're here. Having fun.
All right. Okay, so you know what? The next thing I'm going to do is go into the foods. Do you want me to keep going? Do you want some questions? Do you have some questions? Do you want a break?
Why don't we give you a little bit of a break, Teresa, and I'll just read back some of the comments. If you have a question specific,
sure,
folks, please type it in the chat. I think, one of the, not only your expertise, but the value of being able to do something side by side. There are some on the call who have explored the Niagara region, and I certainly have been to Kew, but Anne and Carl would put their hand up in a vote for the sparklings at Kew. They do a terrific job. Kew is spelled K-E-W if you're looking for it. It's near the Trius Winery in Redstone. And in fact, Redstone were very kind. They recommended our party that went there one afternoon. I've also been to Angel's Gate. Angel's Gate has a lovely, lovely selection.
So can I interrupt here for a second, Marilyn? Sorry. So about Kew. So yes, fabulous Spanish wine producer. They have one of two Giro palates in Ontario. So the machine that the Spanish invented for doing sparkling, and they actually make many of the sparkling wines for the other vineyards in Niagara. So they're quite an established sparkling wine producer, not just for themselves, but for others as well.
Because the sparkling bottling line is a different setup than other bottling lines. So Niagara, I think, is well known for sharing their resources, and for every house to invest in what's necessary, I think is not feasible. So that's great to know that Q is sharing. If you've got a chance to go to Angel's Gate, their sparkling wine range is called Archangel, and they have a lovely sparkling Sauvignon Blanc. I don't know whether you'd comment on that, Teresa, about how common a Sauvignon Blanc sparkling is.
So Sauvignon Blanc sparkling is obviously a little bit different. It's much higher in acid. Angel's Gate makes a really good regular sparkling Sauvignon Blanc. So turning it into a sparkling is just kind of a no-brainer. But it is different. It is different. It's much more acidic. It's sharper. It's going to be paired with slightly different foods than some of the more traditional ones.
So in terms of a question, we're getting lots of great feedback on the food pairings. So thank you for that, Teresa. People are asking for recipes, so we can certainly find a way to push that out. And I think it would be valuable if we condense the slides and maybe into a PDF and send those out to people as well. You know, just highlighting the different styles. Just the content slides would be great. We can push that out to people after.
Okay.
And we have a question. For this question.
Ooh, what's the sparkling wine event that Niagara does every summer? Pam?
So we did it not last year, obviously because of COVID, but friends of ours and us did it the year before. And basically it's very similar to the ice wine tour, where you purchase a package and then you're able to travel around to different wineries and try their sparkling wines paired with food. So it was a really great way to try some of the different sparkling wines. And like Marilyn said, I've actually been to Angel's Gate before. It was one of the ones we went back to, but some of the other wineries we hadn't been to. And Redstone was one of the wineries we'd been to, but we hadn't, I think they had a sparkling rosé, which was just delightful. So last year with, you know, everything was so up in the air with COVID, we didn't know what was going on. And I guess they forgot to remove it from their websites because they were still advertising it. Normally it's the second weekend in August. I actually called one of the wineries and they're like, oh no, we're sorry, you know, due to COVID, we're not doing it. But apparently that they do every year, just like the Ice Wine Festival. So it's a good way to travel around the Niagara region and try some of the different wineries' sparklings offerings, basically. Yeah.
I don't see you at the moment, Danielle, but something to think about for if and when we ever get out of this. Danielle organizes our wine tours or tours to wineries.
So there was a question about the pairings of your food, if you would consider them suitable to suit with a Lambrusco, a red sparkling wine.
Okay, so the sausage rolls for sure. Seafood casserole, I probably wouldn't. Chickpeas, yeah. What else was there?
Cheese.
Chips. Sparkling is sparkling. If you like red sparkling chips, and salty. So if you think of Jackson Triggs makes a sparkling Merlot. Australia does a sparkling Shiraz, and the Italians do Lambrusco. Okay, so they're all red wines that are sparkling, great around Christmas time. They're kind of fun, but they're lighter than other red wines. And they've got the sparkling characteristics, but they're heavier than, say, a traditional champagne or some of the white ones. So, I don't know, did that answer the question?
We got a thumbs up from the person who asked. And so maybe one last question before we move on. Not only just to reinforce that people are loving the seafood casserole and all of your recommendations. One of our guests would like to know, do you have something that's a recommendation for a lighter? Are we sort of at the bottom of the list that you've recommended, or is there a little further place to go for lighter bubbles?
Less alcohol or less?
Maybe less alcohol, maybe.
Okay, so have you tried the Australian one? Because that's that. So I've deliberately done it from heavy to light. but they're all relatively dry. So in addition to this, there could be sweeter ones as well. So it depends on whether, you know, light is just lighter in alcohol and lighter in flavor, or actually a little bit sweeter as well.
Right.
Because there's lots of those. But
Yeah, so that's good to know, folks. The insert that you got is sent to you in order of Teresa's recommendation from heavy to light. My apologies. And before we head into the next segment, this just in, news flash, breaking news. The Clicot with bacon wrapped scallops hit it out of the ballpark. So people are enjoying your pairings as well as adding some of their own.
so, okay, so you know what? That's a great segue into the next slide, because
Absolutely.
I can find my sharing again. Share screen. I start with saying, so one of the things that I find really, really interesting about sparkling wine is it really is the only wine that you can have at breakfast. So a mimosa, although I must admit, if I'm having it for breakfast and if it's a champagne or a really good sparkling, I like to keep my sparkling and my orange juice separate. But breakfast, lunch, sparkling wine is a great wine for lunch. If you go to a restaurant and you're having a light lunch, or even a medium-bodied lunch, but just not, like in our society, we don't typically have our main meal at noon. Sparkling is fabulous, is a fabulous lunch wine. Dinner. So dinner depends on what you're having. Anything to do with seafood, a sparkling goes with. I'm not apt to have a sparkling with a steak or lamb or red meat or anything really heavy, or, you know, something like that. And of course, snacks. So any of your potato chips or your afternoon snack. In fact, even at high tea, you typically now have the choice between the tea or a sparkling or a bubbly. Okay, so anything that you would have at a high tea goes with sparkling. So the pairings in your kit, I introduced them in the beginning, but let me explain like why. Okay, so potato chips, salty, deep fried. So anything deep fried, anything really salty goes with sparkling. Indian spice, roasted spice, again. So the sparkling should calm down the spice. The brie is creamy. Hot Italian sausage rolls, it just hits it on so many levels because it's puff pastry, it's spicy, it's fatty. The seafood casserole, shellfish. If you think shellfish, think sparkling, okay? And it's very creamy. Anything that's creamy, like if you got mayonnaise and butter, and so you had breadcrumbs and butter and mayonnaise and the fish in there. Okay. Assorted tea biscuits, again, classic, traditional for dipping. When in Champagne, so the Champagne region is really kind of, in some ways, an oxymoron, because they have some of the most expensive wines in the world, and yet they eat some of the most rustic food in the world. It's really quite interesting. So on the one hand, in Champagne, caviar and foie gras, salty, deep fried, expensive. Champagne and those foods are known to go together. I don't know that a lot of people in Champagne eat those foods. In Bordeaux, their preferred sparkling is champagne, and they will have those foods. When I was, I went to visit a producer, and we tried all of this champagnes, and then he took my friend and I out to lunch, and he brought with him half a dozen bottles of champagne, different champagnes for us to have at lunch to try with the different things. We had sausage and stew and the most rudimentary peasant food. And I say that in a good sense, because I like peasant food, but that was the cuisine of the restaurant. And that's the norm in Champagne. It's very, very interesting. The highest priced wines in the world and the most basic, interesting, like simple foods. So anyway, cheese souffle, cheese and eggs. If you're doing a souffle or if you're doing eggs, so eggs are really hard to pair with wine. There are very few wines that go with eggs. That'll curdle the wine. It doesn't do anything for the eggs. Sparkling is your answer. Langres cheese is from that area, and I didn't have any, or we didn't have any, so that's why I chose the triple, or Mike and I chose it together, the triple cream brie cheese. Creamy. The Langres is stronger though, it has a stronger flavor, and so the Champagne cuts the strength of the cheese. The Joiy, so why I did the sausage roll, so a typical Champenois meal is the Joiy or tripe sausage, done a number of different ways, but it's fatty, it's strong, and again, I talk about, good old-fashioned peasant food, right? Sausage rolls, or, sausage stew, or just sausage and potatoes. That's what you're going to get there. Casserole. So if anybody's had casserole, of course, it's got multiple types of meat in it. It's a casserole. It's strong. It's rich. It's creamy. It's heavy. It's got multiple meats. It's a really interesting dish, and you can only eat a small amount, or at least I can. Sparkling is the wine to have with it. It cuts the heaviness, it cuts the grease, it cuts the meatiness of it. And it's a local dish. And then the biscuit de Rien, okay? Classic for dipping. They make them there and they dip them in their champagne. Additional pairings. So charcuterie board. Salty, meaty, and variety. So, and you'll see the word variety in a number of places. And what I really mean by that is if you've got a platter with multiple types of things, it's very difficult to find a single wine, like a Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay or a red, that's going to go with all of those things. And that's typically what you have as appetizers. So whether it's a charcuterie board or tapas or whatever culture's like appetizers, sparkling's your answer. So, and it's also festive, and it's, to start things with the sparkling. And it goes with all of the different dishes. So anyway, charcuterie board, salty, meaty, variety. Chef Mike's Parmesan shortbreads. I really should have said ahead of time, you guys all have the recipe. Those are perfect with sparkling, of course, and they're perfect appetizer. There. Tapas, salty, and again, a variety. So if you have a tapas plate, you're going to have a little ham sandwich with manchego cheese. You're going to have, all kinds of different little things, and sparkling's probably the best wine to go with all of those things. And also appetizers tend to be richer, like puff pastry and salt, and richer, and it's an introduction to things, and it's all little plates. And so in Italy, when you go to a restaurant and you're starting and you have appetizers, it's very, very common to have a Prosecco to start. If you're, most places, you start with a sparkling, with whatever appetizers you have. So then, okay, fish, lobster, scallop, shrimp, fish and chips, oysters, clam chowder, crab cakes. The theme here, seafood. So anything and everything to do with seafood really lends itself to a sparkling. So just seafood in general, like if it's seafood, you don't have to have sparkling with it. There are other wines that you can use, but if you see seafood, think sparkling, okay? Consider it. Rich, so things that are rich go with sparkling because sparkling cuts the richness, okay? So if something is rich, like you can't eat too much or too many rich things unless you've got a palate cleanser, unless you've got something to refresh your palate. So rich foods. And fish, lobster, scallop, shrimp. So I said I probably wouldn't have sparkling with a steak. The balance is wrong. Sparkling is light, fresh, crisp. Steak is heavy. It's dense, it's meaty, it's whatever. The balance is not right. So fish, lobster, scallop, shrimp, the balance is right with the sparkling. Okay, and depending on the dish, you're going to choose a different sparkling. So if something's really rich and heavy, you want a traditional method, stronger, breadier, heavier. If you've got just a light dish, then you might want a Prosecco or, anyway, something lighter. So, but the balance of seafood and sparkling, and there's a whole bunch of different seafoods and there's a whole bunch of different sparklings, but in general, you can find a good balance between those foods in almost all cases. Having said that, it doesn't mean that sparkling is the only wine that goes with these, and I'm certainly not trying to say that. So for example, if I have lobster and melted butter, I'm probably going to have an oak Chardonnay. Like, to me, melted butter, drawn butter, lobster dipped in it, I want a bold, oaky Chardonnay to go with that. Okay, so a sparkling or a champagne is going to go with it, but it's not the only thing. Okay, fish and chips, anything deep fried. So chicken fingers, KFC. If you were going to have a wine with KFC, it would be sparkling. I can't imagine having anything but sparkling with KFC. Oysters, seafood. So anything seafood, think sparkling. In this case, fresh, light, the balance is right. Okay. Clam chowder. And again, there are other things that would go as well. So Chardonnay here, but it's creamy, it's seafood, a sparkling will work. Crab cake, seafood, salty and fried. Cries out for a sparkling. Club sandwich. Okay, so think of a club sandwich. Somebody mentioned scallops wrapped in bacon. So what's in a club sandwich? You got bacon, you got poultry, you got lettuces, you've got breads, you got mayonnaise, sparkling. And poultry. Okay, so creamy dishes, light dishes. There are a number of different poultry dishes. Again, there are also a number of different wines that will go with poultry. But depending on the dish that you have, don't rule out sparkling. Or if you've got a sparkling, or you've got some interesting spices or ingredients with your poultry, you've done it with Indian spices, or you've done it different ways, think sparkling. Also, if it's a creamy dish and you want something to cut the creaminess, then sparkling. Conversely, light dishes, light, simple dishes, you don't want a heavy wine to overpower it, sparkling's your answer. Chinese, Thai, Vietnamese, sushi. So again, for some of these, my first choice might not be sparkling. It might be a Gewürztraminer or an off-dry Riesling, but spicy complex blends, so they will refresh your palate, they will cool the spices. Sparkling is a definite option for any of those foods. Fruit desserts, fresh. So a dessert wine can be too heavy with a fruit dessert. So fresh fruit, maybe even with a sauce or something, but a light, I was going to say light, healthy dessert, have sparkling. And then fruit desserts, we don't have demi-secs or do sparklings here, But sweeter desserts, I would not have one of these dry sparklers. I would have a sweeter sparkling, okay? You always want to match your sweetness. If you've got a sweet dessert, you want to match your sweetness in your wine. And there are sweet sparklers, or you can have a different dessert wine. But a demi-sec or a jus works with the sweeter desserts. So, chocolate. You notice in almost all of our kits, every month for 5 years, we've had a square of dark chocolate. And there isn't one in this kit. So, sparkling wine works with some chocolates. So, milk chocolates, sweeter chocolates, softer chocolates, but dark chocolate, they clash, or they can clash. And it's interesting because a classical pairing with sparkling, the one exception to this is truffles. So you've got a ganache filled chocolate with, chocolate on the outside will go with especially a robust champagne or traditional method sparkling. But if the chocolate is just dark chocolate, in fact, try it sometime, because if you have a sparkling open and you've got a square of chocolate around, they fight each other for some reason. Having said that, our Valentine's night on the 13th is going to be a chocolate and wine pairing, and one of the wines will be a sparkling. So it'll be interesting. And we've got different kinds of chocolates, but it'll be interesting to try them all and try them with the dark chocolate as well and see if my theory is correct. Okay, questions about food and wine pairing?
So again, Teresa, people are loving your insights and commentary. There's been a little bit of chatter, I have to say, about Kentucky Fried Chicken and champagne. It's the Canadian way, the champagne budget on a Kentucky Fried Chicken. So yeah, it's been terrific. Thank you for addressing the question about the chocolate. And did you talk about white chocolate? Not really a chocolate?
No, and you know what? And in fact, even with the chocolate pairing, there's no white chocolate. I don't know.
I'm just looking up for one of our.
Chocolate's sweeter.
Yeah.
I don't like white chocolate, so that's probably why I don't address it.
Yeah, I'm just looking up to
Terrible.
see the Australian Joiy, as you say, is available in something in the small. I only see it at the LCBO site in the small
In
size.
the cans.
I think it's only in the cans. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, it's only in the cans. And they have so this one's made from Riesling. It's and it's okay. There's a rosé that I actually really love. And it's in the can, light, friendly. They say it's like a Prosecco, but when we get on to the next section, I'm going to suggest that it might just be carbonated.
Right. So before we move on to that, I just want to make a comment. I have enough glassware in this house for all of you to come at some point in the after time. But I put the Clicot in the same redstone glasses next to the Niagara Entourage Brut. The Entourage Brut has been open since 7 p.m. and I still have bubbles. The Clicot has died in the same glassware. So, if that bubbles, if that experience is important to you, that Entourage really, it punches above its weight. It's local and economically affordable. So thanks for introducing us to that.
Yeah.
What's
I
your?
agree, and I've taken Entourage Brut to many homes, and where the expectations were high, and it holds up. It holds up. I think it's great wine. But having said that, there are a lot of great sparkling wines in Ontario. for sure. That's one of the things we do very well.
Well, and I think that you would agree that if you have the opportunity on a Friday or Saturday night, if you know you're going to have one or two different kinds of varietals, put them side by side at the same time. And this is the only way.
Absolutely.
Consecutive, always do them side by side. And so we're coming into the 9 o'clock hour. We're getting a little longer. It's a master class, and we appreciate the time. So on we go. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. My favorite kind of pairing.
Okay, so we're nearing the duplicate sign. Okay, so how sparkling wine is made. So, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. There are whole vinification courses on this, but I just wanted to give you a sense for what the difference is between, we've been talking about the traditional method and the heavier ones and the Prosecco style and then carbonation. So the real difference is, so there's all these steps. So you pick it early, higher in acid, always by hand. Certainly the champagne method and the method traditionnel, like by law in Champagne, it's all picked by hand. Multiple sites, many different vineyards, everything's kept separate. Okay, they're very particular about, comes from here, like everything's kept separate. Pressing, not destemmed, pressed immediately, no color. So whether there's 2 red grapes and 1 white grape in a typical champagne, right? And yet these are clear white. So they're pressed immediately. There's no skin contact. They extract the juice. There's no color. The first fermentation in large casks or stainless, they quite often use commercial yeast, and it produces a still white wine, and they call that vin clair. So you get a white wine, and then it's the art of champagne making, at least, is the assemblage, blending of multiple vin clairs, so still white wines that have been made, different sites, different years, different blends. And then the tirage and bottle age. So bottled with sugar and yeast. And you know the cap on a beer bottle, that funny cap? That's what they use. They put a crown cap on that. That's the original cap. The yeast, so they've got, the yeast is also trapped in there. And sorry, I skipped a step. So the tirage and bottle aging. So the sugar and yeast are put in, and then the second fermentation in the bottle. So this is the difference between, the major difference between the traditional method and the Prosecco method. So once they've made their wines, they put it in the bottle, and then they add some yeast and they add some sugar, and they let it ferment a second time right in the bottle. Okay, so the carbon dioxide is trapped in the bottle, and the yeast is trapped in the bottle. So remember I said one of the differences between a traditional method wine or champagne and a Prosecco is the yeasty, bready flavors. Well, that's because the yeast is trapped in the bottle, so there's a high concentration of yeast to liquid, right? So you can taste it. In the end result, that's what you're tasting. So the yeast is trapped. Then the riddling. So I talked about the Giro palette, the Spanish one, or the hand done riddling. So the riddling is the turning of the bottles every single day, so that it turns around and it ends up upside down. So remember, now we get all this yeast in there and we get stuff in this bottle that we don't want in our final product. So they're going to freeze the neck of the bottle. So we get all this yeast, and now we've turned it for days and days and days, and it's upside down, and all the yeast has fallen into the neck of the bottle. They freeze the neck and turn it and pop that yeast out. So the yeast is just expelled, okay, because it was frozen, pops out. So now we get a gap. So Brut Nature, they top it up with the same sparkling wine or the same wine as they used to make it in the first place. No sugar, nothing else. If the dosage contains sugar, then it will sweeten the wine. It will add some sugar. In Ontario, you know, when you see the bottles that say ice wine, the dosage is ice wine. They use the ice wine to top up the bottle and sweeten the sparkling. Okay. And then, so once that's added and it's fill again, that's when they put the proper cork in. So the mushroom cork, the wire cage, and the foil capsule. And that's pretty much how it's made. It's labor intensive if it's done manually, picked manually, if it's riddled manually. It's a lot of steps, a lot of processes, and a lot of time. And in Champagne, at least, there are also rules about how long you have to store the wines before you can sell them. So that's the traditional method. So Charmat, I'm like 5 minutes away, babe. I've been told to wrap it up. So the Charmat method. So we take it all, we make the still wines. Sometimes we use different grapes. But instead of putting it in the individual bottles and adding the yeast, we put it in a big steel tank and add the yeast and do the second fermentation in a steel tank. So 2 things about that. One, easier than doing it in the individual bottles, right? And then disgorging it and, you know, doing all that, freezing the neck and all that kind of stuff. You do it in a big tank, so it's easier. But the significant difference is the yeast to liquid content is much, much lower. So the bready flavors, the yeasty flavors, the strong flavors of a champagne or a traditional method in a Charmat method. So Prosecco is made Charmat method. Some of the Ontario sparkling wines, it's less expensive. It's the Charmat method to the traditional method, because the traditional method is like, it's a serious sparkling wine, right? It can be bready and anyway. So it's done in a large chilled pressurized tank, and then it's bottled and capped. Okay, so that's the Charmat method. And lastly, carbonation, made just like soda pop. So I would argue probably the Australian can has just had CO2 added to it. Okay. Hey, cheap and cheerful, right? Okay. So that's the end of the masterclass. And this is my very last slide. Coming up next, Valentine's Day, February 13th, 7 o'clock. So what I'm organizing is, so we're thinking, okay, we were talking about doing chocolate and wine. So we've got 3 wines, a sparkling Riesling and a Malbec. It's an off-dry Riesling, sparkling. So 3 different wines that I've chosen to go with the particular chocolates. Give us something to talk about and something to try with each. We have 5 bars of different chocolates, everything from like a rosé chocolate to a deep dark chocolate. Okay, so 5 different kinds from, yep. And then I thought, okay, so chocolate and wine is great. It's not really dinner. There's a local gal that does charcuterie boxes. And I thought, why don't people start with a charcuterie box and then have the chocolate and the wine, and we can get together to have the charcuterie, or you can have it before the chocolate and wine. The only thing is, do it again. The only thing is, so I've been talking to her and I love this presentation. There are only 11 of these boxes left in the province. But she has other boxes, white boxes, and there's a $10 premium to have the box, the Valentine's box, and the additional stuff and everything else. I guess $10. But there are only 11 in the province. So I'm suggesting the charcuterie. in a regular box with this as an upgrade. It's Valentine's Day. Any of you fellas that want to order the upgrade, let me know. Otherwise, what I'm trying to do is keep it at about $99 for 2 people, okay? Because there's enough charcuterie, chocolate, and wine for 2 people. Right now, the cost is at about $110, but I'm talking to the charcuterie people and the chocolate people to see if we can get it down to $99. Anyway, so if you're interested, that's what's happening on February 13th at 7 o'clock. It's a Valentine's night thing. I hope you guys, anyway, you guys said you wanted more things. So this is what we've come up with for Valentine's Day.
And if you've not experienced Chocolate Tales, they're located in Hamilton and Toronto. This is a world-class chocolatier. And if you've not experienced the product from a world-class chocolatier, there's just, it's a differential experience. So I would really encourage you to think about this as a night in, Valentine's the night before, and maybe you don't eat it all that night, but you'll experience something that really can't be curated in any other way. So thank you, Teresa, for reaching out and putting that together for the club.
So, and David's going to be there on the Zoom call. So he's going to talk about the history of chocolate. He's going to talk about making chocolate. He's going to talk about the chocolate flavors. I'll talk about the wines. We can taste each of the wines with the, or each of the chocolates with the wines. And to Marilyn's point, this will be the 4th time I've placed orders with him, whether it be chocolate making classes or boxes of chocolates or whatever. And so for me to do that 4 times in the last year says I really like them.
And their product speaks for itself. It's really acceptable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, when you deal with an artisan and someone, and quite frankly, they're struggling, as many small businesses are. So this is a win-win. We're able to support a small business, and in the after time, people might come to their in-person classes. But for right now, this is a way to be with someone that you love and have a night in these difficult, dark times, and support a local business. So thank you, Teresa, for organizing that.
Yeah. So I just good point, Marilyn. There are actually 4 local businesses that we would be supporting. The charcuterie business, they do this, and they do some Vietnamese takeout packages as well. Anyway, just a tiny little local business that I know. Of course, David's business in Niagara, the chocolate Tales, great product. The wines, a local wine agent, and one of the wines is a local Ontario wine. So 4 different local businesses supported on the evening. That's when I do these things, I try and figure out how we're also going to support local businesses.
And Teresa, someone is asking, and it's the right question, there will be pricing for individuals. So this is just a ballpark for couples. We'll have to do something.
So it's for 2, and this is I'm grappling with this because 3 wines, 5 chocolates. That's trying to figure out how to do. I'm not sure. You almost, and it was like, yeah, you almost need 2. You almost need 2 people.
Yeah, we'll figure that out.
Split it. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandra.
Yeah. Because they're not small, they're full bottles. Yeah. And there's 5 different chocolates, and they're chocolate bars, and anyway.
Yeah.
Grappling with it.
Yeah. Well.
And in different times, it wouldn't be an issue.
Might be a two-night event for singles. So we're. Might be a 2-night event.
One thing about a single thing is, so you have dinner for 2 nights and chocolate for 2 nights and wine for 2 nights.
Yeah, because they're not going to go bad. So when you say that, Teresa, just before we go, I wanted to ask you if there were, we've had 6 choices tonight, and some nights there might be this unicorn in our house, which is called leftover wine. How would you store? What were your recommendations for storing a sparkling to use in another day?
Okay, so good reminder. Thanks, Marilyn. So, couple of things. One, somebody, and if you're, I'm going to do a stop share. If you're out there, you know what? I was talking to you, and I can't remember who it was I was talking to that reminded me of an old way of protecting sparkling wines. A spoon. So if you have your sparkling wine and it's open in the fridge and you put a spoon in it, the spoon for whatever reason, and I actually don't even know, the spoon keeps the bubbles intact. So that's one, and it only works for sparkling wine. Do not use it for still wines, red wines, anything else. It does not work, but for sparkling wine, and I've done it and it's worked. For days, no, but overnight, yes. So the second, and sparkling's tricky. So if it was a still wine and you had a smaller bottle, I would say put it in the smaller bottle, because the less air contact that something has, the better off it is. But with sparkling, that's tricky. Your sparkling wine is going to be okay the next day if you put a proper cap on it. And it's not even, sparkling is different than still in that you can't really suck the air out without changing the bubble composition as well. So, which is one of the reasons why we tried to do, as many small bottles as possible, but these ones will all be good tomorrow. The following day will be iffy. So sparkling is trickier than the still wines, but
I've used a saran with an elastic, and you've got some small bottles tonight. So if you have leftovers, transfer to the small bottle. Some of them,
yes, that's true.
Transfer to the small bottle. They have screw tops. This is a great way to extend a sparkling. But if you don't have a small bottle, just a little bit of saran, a little bit of a elastic.
So saran's going to operate the same way as any kind of stopper.
Right.
So yeah. So there are champagne stoppers and there are just regular stoppers. It actually doesn't make a huge difference.
Oh.
So saran, a champagne stopper, a regular stopper, because you've got the same amount of air in there. It's not, anyway.
Yeah.
Smaller bottle, less air, but when you're transferring it, be really careful because you don't want to kill all the bubbles by pouring it too quickly or doing something silly. And your little bottles just leave, like just cover them.
I think the best advice is not to have any left
back in.
Don't have any left. Don't have any leftover, and then you don't have any worries. I think that's what I'm hearing.
That's right. Isn't that what Diane said? What is leftover wine? But if you opened all 6 and you're by yourself, well.
then you need to send us a porch pickup, and we'll get there. And
that's right. Drop by, have a chat in the snow.
So I think, Teresa, I think it's time to say goodbye. A master class lasts a little bit longer, and we've gone past 9, but it's a Friday. So okay. I think everyone's engaged and having a great time, and thank you.
Okay, well, and if anybody has any questions or needs to know more or anything, you know where I am. You know where I live. Or my email at any rate.
And me too. If anyone has any wine left, we feel like we want to do a group cheers. I'm going to change the gallery to gallery view. If you'd like to be in our group cheers, I'm just going to change this. Can I unmute all at the same time? Why would I? That's all to unmute. Okay, there we go. So if you want to unmute.
I don't want us on there. I just want to see everybody else. Yeah.
So
Okay.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers. Great start to
Thank
the
you.
evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa.
Daniel's
Thank you, Marilyn.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank
Thanks.
you, everyone. Night, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Always. Thank you.